This is the Retro XP Podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games, from the first and second generation with the Odyssey, Atari 2600, and Intellivision, all the way up to Generation 7 with the Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii. Today in this episode, we'll be talking about a documentary on Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine on YouTube, a Splatterhouse RPG, never knew this was a thing, and a dive into the old world of video game magazines we consumed back in the day, from Nintendo Power to GamePro, EGM, and so many more. All right, with this short intro, let's get started. Retro XP is now part of the Hair of the Dogcast network. The network has tons of bonus content and episodes on Patreon at patreon.com/Hair of the Dogcast. So help support us by donating and getting access to bonus episodes and the exclusive Discord community. Otherwise, you can follow me on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. Episodes are also live on YouTube, and follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. If you're listening to me on Spotify, you may have noticed certain amounts of gaps in some of the episodes. I generally release episodes weekly, and of course, if you go on Spotify, there may be some weeks that are completely missing. I am having a hard time trying to understand Spotify's algorithm with music. I know there's certain limits to like how long you can use certain copyrighted music, when you play them. I think generally it's like 15 to 20 seconds or something like that before you get like a C&D or something. And some music can be used while others can't. So in a lot of my old episodes, I rip game music from certain games, and I use them in my intros. I use them in my, cuts, segue cuts, and then I use them in my outros. And Spotify took down a few of the episodes, when I would ask like, hey, why, what was the track that I used? They would tell me, okay, these music tracks you can't use. So instead of using old game tracks, I'm just basically using copyright free stuff, I think, from here on out. So if you go and listen to me on Spotify and you see a few episodes missing, maybe you can check them out on some other platforms like Apple Podcasts, Deezer, iHeartRadio, even YouTube. They're all there somewhere, so you can listen to them. Also, with this being one of the last episodes of the year, 2025, I do truly want to thank all of you for listening and joining me on this journey. This was this was a big leap for me. Doing a solo podcast isn't easy, really, especially since when I talk about video games, I like to talk about them with other people. For those that don't know, I was running a video game podcast for years with a few friends of mine. It was called EXP Cast, and we talked about mostly new games, video game news, previews. We talked about the games we were playing, and we had a lot of talking points. And just over the years with, shifting of the guard and people, leaving and wanting to do other things. And then a lot had to do with me and my decision-making with it. Not necessarily the best decision-making at the time. It went under, I want to say, what was it, about 2 years ago now at this point. And then I kind of thought to myself, like, do I want to get back into it? Do I want to keep going with it? And, if I did want it to restart, what should I do? And interestingly enough, last year and this past year was kind of a changing point for me, with not only restarting podcasting by doing a solo thing, talking about retro video games primarily. I also joined the Hair of the Dogcast guys, a lot of local friends of mine here that were running their own podcast at the same time I was, and they invited me on to do a lot of their stuff and a lot of their podcasts. So there's going to be some changes there as well. So you'll probably hear from me soon on some new projects that I'm going to be doing starting in 2026. 2026 is going to be a big year for me for podcasting for sure. So you're going to hear me on more places. But in terms of Retro XP, that's what you're here for. Retro gaming to me is still a pretty niche hobby, despite the fact that more and more people are getting into it and appreciating the classics instead of some of the slop BS that we're getting nowadays. I'm passionate about this because as a kid growing up, a big part of my childhood was centered around video games and talking with other people about all the cool games we're playing. And all this still rings true, of course. I talk with people all the time about modern games we're playing. A lot of my coworkers are playing Battlefield 6 and love it. And they're playing Arc Raiders and all these other, cool new games. But I think when you're younger, it felt different. And that's why trying to define what is truly nostalgia, quotes, and what is truly retro can be different and subjective for many. These times, especially video games, are snapshots in our lives that we grew up and create core memories with and for us. So lest we forget those memories, keep those at the forefront, and know that if you don't have a lot of your old video games, don't have a lot of your old video game systems, there's places out there where you can go and buy this stuff. Most likely, if you live anywhere near a major city, there's going to be an old retro video game store that deals exclusively with retro video games and retro video game systems. So, do your search, check those out. Those stores are generally run by passionate people who are not there to make money, but are there for the love of the game and for the love of the video game space. And there's just a big sense of community. Every time you go in a video game store, you can get lost in a conversation with someone just sitting there, and the video game store I go to, a lot of times I just like to kind of go and just browse for 20, 30 minutes, may not have an idea in mind of what I want, but I'm there to browse and then even just jump in on a conversation someone's having or whatever. So like I said, thank you once again. I'm also going to make another pledge right here and right now that for the entire month of January, and I was debating whether or not I wanted to make this pledge, but I have, if I say it out loud, I have to do it. For the entire month of January, I will only be playing retro games. And, in accordance with the show, timeline, whatever, 360, PS3 era and down. I mean, I still buy modern games and play those mostly throughout my, days and weeks. However, I've got shelves of old games just sitting there, and I want to give them more love. I buy these old retro games and then I put them back on the shelf, and I may, spin them for a little bit and then just never touch them ever again. So, I want to go out and play more games, play more of these old games that I buy. So I don't know if I can hold on enough to not play any modern games for the whole month, but damn, I will try my hardest. Let's just say next month in January for Retro XP, I'll be talking more about the games I've been playing. With that being said, I haven't really picked up anything recently in terms of retro stuff. I'm still kind of reeling from that Arkansas trip that I had a while back, about a month and a half ago now. So, nothing on the horizon or anything. I think with the month of January coming in, I do want to. There is a small list of games that I kind of want to, go out and hunt for. So January, you'll probably hear me talking about some more pickups. I'm probably going to be planning a trip to hit up some local game shops here in my home state of Wisconsin. So it may require a little bit of traveling, but it's going to be fun nonetheless. I think I love video game hunting. So, but as far as what I've been playing, I jumped into Resident Evil 3 Nemesis recently. One of the other podcasts I am on is Zombie Dogs. It's a focused Resident Evil podcast. Basically, we talk about everything Resident Evil. And we just started the podcast a few months ago. And our latest episode, we talked about Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. So I wanted to jump on and have a fresh take on it. It's been a few years since I played it. And, still holds up really as one of the more interesting Resident Evil games out there. It's kind of a shorter fare. It's only one campaign compared to Resident Evil 2 when you had 4 campaigns in there. Resident Evil 3 only had the one campaign, but you had choices that you can make. And I forget what they called them in the game itself, but they were certain moments where if you don't know the game, it's the city that you're in, Raccoon City, overrun with zombies, and you're Jill Valentine, a major character in the lore, and you're trying to get out of the city while also trying to expose this pharmaceutical company that caused this outbreak. And in the meantime, you're being chased by this giant monster creature called the Nemesis, and he'll pop up at certain points in the game and chase you. He's pretty much unkillable, and you can, you can fight him. If you got enough ammo. Most of the time, it's just easier to run. But if you do choose to fight him, you can get some really cool weapons upgrades and stuff. But yeah, so there's certain intervals where like you encounter this large monster and you can make certain choices that could affect your path forward, or even just like I said, one particular ending in specific affects the ending overall. So one of the last decisions you make can affect what ending you get. So it's kind of interesting. It's not necessarily cut and dry in terms of like, oh, if I make this decision, you have a very small window to make this decision, because the screen will flash and then it'll tell you like one case in particular. You're going across a bridge and the Nemesis stands in front of you. Do you push the Nemesis off the bridge, or do you jump off the bridge yourself? Which could affect the ending that you get. Certain instances, like the first instance where you're in front of the police station and you can choose to either run into the police station or stay and fight. So it's just a, matter of what you're willing to put yourself through. So, it's not my favorite Resident Evil. I know it's good. Like I said, I have rose tinted glasses with Resident Evil games, so it's not like, if I say it's not my favorite Resident Evil game, it doesn't mean it's bad. Like, it's still a great game, but for me, it's not one that I routinely revisit quite often. So, next up we'll be talking about is Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil Code Veronica. So stay tuned for those. Last week I recorded an episode on ninja games. So when I was doing my research for those games, I played Shinobi 3, which is, I think I said in the episode, is one of my favorite ninja games of all time for the Sega Genesis. And I also played Shadow Dancer for the heck of it, because I also love that game too. Shadow of the Ninja is actually a recent game I picked up for the NES, and I played that too as well. So that game was a kind of like a fun little Ninja Gaiden light game. So if you don't like Ninja Gaiden because it's too hard, Shadow of the Ninja for the NES is maybe more up your alley. After you listen to this episode, I need you to go on YouTube and watch a documentary on Electronic Gaming Monthly that's on YouTube. And this documentary was co-created by two of my favorite YouTube channels, My Life in Gaming and GameSack. These two guys, or these two channels, focus exclusively on like talking about retro games, the retro game space in general. And, they talk a little bit on new stuff too, but they're mostly primarily retro games. So the two channels kind of co-created this video called Pixels to Pages, the story of Electronic Gaming Monthly. And it's available online for free. Like, you can go on YouTube and just watch this for free, which is crazy to think that we have a platform where we can watch really good stuff, really good content. Like, me personally, I don't watch TV that often. I watch YouTube mostly because I think it's much better organic, content that I'm interested in. It's an hour and 16 minutes long. This article actually, I should mention, is on time extension. The hour and 16-minute long documentary was just released a couple days ago. And it's on both My Life in Gaming's YouTube channel and GameSack's YouTube channel. And it features interviews with former Electronic Gaming Monthly editor-in-chief Ed Semrad. He was one of the big guys that basically was running it, and he's a big focus in the video. And actually, interesting enough, I didn't know, like, he was from my town. He was from I think he lived and grew up in Waukesha, which is like a stone's throw away from where I live in Milwaukee. So the late EGM editor Martin Alessi and one-time managing editor Ken Williams, among many others who were involved in the creation of this magazine. One of the guys from the Video Game History Foundation also makes an appearance, Frank Cifaldi. He gave some context in terms of like what EGM was at the time. And, some of the major topics discussed in this documentary is, how EGM was originally started and their associations with the U.S. national video game team. And even some, interestingly enough, when you think about taking pictures of video games, we had old CRT TVs, and it's not like you could just like take a screenshot from one of those screens and then just send it to a magazine. You had to actually take pictures with a film camera at the time, of these video games. And oftentimes these are at, industry showcases, hugely well lit rooms. And you have, obviously this glass that's over the screen that could kind of affect the quality of your picture and create like these like lighted effects. So Ed Semrad was a big photography nut. So, he took some of the best video game screenshots at the time with a lot of different little quirks and little hacks that he did. The pictures often led to the magazine containing images of games that never saw the light of day. So there's some pictures of games in there that, we never got to see, which is really cool. And it had some of the most unique reviews, which I'll talk about later. So, I haven't finished it yet because I literally this video just popped up on my feed yesterday, and I was like really excited to talk about it. So that's why I'm like recording this episode now in this format. And I was like, man, I want to talk about this, but it's definitely worth checking out, especially since, and this will lead into the topic I talk about later. This video game magazines were what we had as far as video game news and how we consumed our content. So it's really cool in-depth look into like how they were trying to do things different and how they were, even like pioneers at the time. Like when they first started, not a lot of video game magazines existed at this time. So, who wants to read about video games? Go play the games. But it's a good, like I said, it's a good documentary to watch. So another interesting thing I never realized, I talked about this game series before, Splatterhouse. Splatterhouse is a kind of like a horror, like a very brutal, gruesome horror game at the time. And it became popular amongst the Sega Genesis system. It was an arcade game at the time. It was kind of featuring this like buff Jason looking dude that was just, morcelating monsters. And the premise of a lot of those games were you have to go into a haunted mansion to save your girlfriend, so to speak. So this is a game according to article according to Retro Dodo. Canceled RPG called Splatterworld was discovered after 32 years, and conveniently now has an English translation. And apparently, this was slated to come out in 1993 for the Super Nintendo. And Splatterhouse got its start on Famicom, and apparently, it had moved on to the Sega Genesis and stuff. And Splatterworld was this RPG that was meant to be released in 1993, and it met an untimely demise. A lot of people don't really know what happened, and the article says as much. Don't really know why it was never released, but it was probably due, according to the article's author here, was the fact that the SNES was stepping into its prime and people were looking to newer and more exciting titles, which I'm not for sure. Admittedly, Splatterhouse wasn't featured on the Super Nintendo because they had a very my personal opinion, it had a very kid-friendly, family-oriented genre of games. So maybe this would have done better on the Sega Genesis, but the Sega Genesis wasn't necessarily known for RPGs at this time. So still, the game was canceled right pretty close to its finish date, which meant there had to be a finished version of it somewhere. So the Splatterworld ROM was dumped onto 4chan on Halloween, interestingly enough, but it was in Japanese. There was no English translation. And now you can enjoy it in English thanks to the efforts of hacker Aeon Genesis, who has managed to translate the game in just 33 days. I don't know how he did it, but maybe Google Translate had a lot to do with it. So the game officially titled Splatterhouse Rick and the King of Terror. So I haven't played it myself. However, this kind of intrigues me. I don't have an SNES emulator on my PC at this time. However, this intrigues me enough. When I'm looking at it, it kind of looks a little bit like, the campy atmosphere of, Earthbound-ish looking. Your main character obviously is, I think Rick is his name. And yeah, Rick. And then he's, wearing this kind of mask and just walking around these towns and stuff like that. So picking up quests and whatever. So, it's, if you're a Splatterhouse fan, I want to say this is kind of worth your time, worth the look. I think the last big Splatterhouse content we got was like the PS3 and the 360 game years ago. But yeah, so this is kind of cool. Something a little interesting out there that, if you have emulators on your PC, definitely give this a check. Give this a look. Lastly, did you miss out on the Analog 3D? I talked about this system earlier in one of the kind of like modern retro consoles episode. Check it out, please, if you're interested. This system company, Analog, makes the Analog Pocket, which is one of the more powerful handheld devices that can actually play Game Gear games, Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance games, all this stuff. Really good hardware, but just notoriously hard to find. You can't, a lot of times you can't buy it new on the website because they always make such a limited print run. And a couple years ago, they announced that they were going to be doing a piece of hardware for the Nintendo 64 called the Analog 3D. Designed it pretty similar to the Nintendo 64, and it sold out pretty quickly. Analog's a good company. It sold out pretty quickly, and they suffered through a lot of different delays with releasing the hardware to its customers this year. And people started finally getting it. And, I've known a couple people that have gotten it. I've watched a couple of videos of people dicing it and going through the hardware and the specs and all the things you can do with it. Looks like a really good system. And it's got some pretty cool features in it that can really, gas up the Nintendo 64. However, me personally, it's the Nintendo 64. It's not necessarily the best looking system. It had its flaws. I was more of a PS1 guy at the time growing up, but I'm not knocking the system. Like I said, it still, at the end of the day, it still looks like a Nintendo 64 game, whether you play it on a 4K TV or a CRT TV. I want to say last week, they did another pre-order drop where they said, hey, we're going to be opening up pre-orders again. The only caveat was that the tariffs that we're experiencing here in the U.S. Made the price higher compared to the previous price, which sucks. I think it jumped the price by like $40 or something like that. So that kind of sucked. But I mean, the company's got to make their money, and they got to work with whatever the economic climate is, or political climate, however you want to call it. So if you missed out on that, I want to say those pre-orders sold out pretty quickly. There's another contender out in the horizon called the Mod Retro 64 or M64. Mod Retro is a company that also makes hardware kind of similar to Analog, but I think they're not as well known as Analog as well. So looking at the design of this, and this is from Retro Dodo as well. Looking at the design of this M64 console, looks more similar than the Analog 64, and it comes in 3 different colors because the Analog 64 came in like, white and black. This has 3 different colors: white, purple, and green. And like I said, this is more similar in design to the original Nintendo 64. It allows you to plug in up to 4 wired controllers as well. And it's FPGA. I forget what that stands for at this point, but it's an FPGA system, so you're actually able to insert cartridges, and it actually emulates the hardware as opposed to just being software-based like on a PC or something like that. The biggest difference between this and the Analog 3D is the power buttons. Like, it's kind of crazy. It's got this big, huge, chunky power button. It's not a switch like the old Nintendo 64 was, or the Analog 3D is. And then there's a dial on the top of the console in place where the power switch and reset button would have been. So I think it looks like a menu button. So it's probably a way to like scroll through different menu options when you fire up maybe the back end of it. So yeah, what else we got here? Yeah, the menu dial. It's got a little clip, so when a little click sound when you move it, which is pretty cool. And it also gives you access. You can access ROM files uploaded via micro SD cards. So it's got a little micro SD card slot in the back. Looking at the back of it, it's USB-C power. It's got HDMI port. It looks like expandable memory, 4 other USB-C ports, and then a micro SD slot. So yeah, you can play ROM hacks. You can probably upload, English translations or multi-language translations for certain games. Whatever else you can think of. It comes with its own controller, and it's pretty close in design with the original Nintendo 64 controller. Pretty damn close. It's got that same kind of like I don't know what they call it, like kind of like jawbone look or something like that, where it's like you got the 2 small like handles and then the one big one in the front in the middle, which is where your joystick is. So there's a lot of aftermarket Nintendo 64 controllers out there. 8-Bit Dough makes a really good one, and Retro Fighters makes another really good one too, but they design them like modern controllers, whereas with this one, you're getting, a kind of like more authentic looking Nintendo 64 controller. Apparently it's, going to have Hall effect joysticks, enhanced rumble features built in, so you don't have to like put in a rumble pack like the old 64 controller, and it's wireless too as well, so that's kind of nice. This also comes in, I think, yellow, clear, and blue or purple. I don't know, I can't tell. So yeah, it looks pretty close. I would say about as dangerously close to the original Nintendo 64 controller. Yeah, it looks like it's going to cost $200. And the only way you can get this right now is if you go to the Mod Retro website. There are no pre-orders open yet. However, if you go to the website, you can join the newsletter and they will let you know when pre-orders are opening up. And I don't know when. Like I said, these images just popped up recently in the news. So I don't know when this is going to be happening. But if you join the newsletter, hopefully they'll let you know as soon as possible and have that $200 ready. And then, with the way things are going now with, these systems and everything, who knows how long you're going to be waiting. So, yeah, that's about it. Nothing really, I think in my last general episode, I talked a lot about video game remasters that are coming this week or this month. Nothing really much new that popped up recently. I think the only thing new that we got was Nintendo Switch 2 Online got Ninja Gaiden 2 and Battletoads for the NES. Nintendo Switch Online 1 and 2. So if you have the original Nintendo Switch or the Nintendo Switch 2, you can enjoy it there. And then Bionic Commando and Kid Icarus for the Game Boy. So that's cool if you if you have that Nintendo subscription. Otherwise, Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus Classic subscribers didn't really get anything new. The only thing that we got recently was Night Dive Studios just knocking it out of the park with these old school like remasters. They remastered a first-person shooter called Outlaws, and then also just recently they just like shadow dropped it. Blood Refresh Supply. It's a updated version of a first-person shooter that Monolith Productions made in 1997. I believe I talked about this game before. This game was announced in September and then just all of a sudden came out, I want to say a week or two ago or something like that. So, interestingly enough, there was another remastered version of this called Blood Fresh Supply that came out in 2019. And then now this is Refresh Supply, which is, I would say, arguably a better version of this. So looks pretty much exactly the same, as you think. 4K 120 frames a second on PlayStation 4, 5, PC, Xbox One, Series X. It's got all these add-ons, extended modding support. You can mod it to your heart's content. Local split screen. It's got new missions as well. So it's if you're into old school boomer shooters, before we called them boomer shooters, this is worth picking up, I think. So the talking point to today for this episode is retro video game magazines. When I did my research for this episode, I found so many different video game magazine publications. And, this stretched back all the way back to the late 70s, which covered arcade games, home console games at the time, basically anything imaginable. Pinball games, even too, pinball machines. A lot of video game magazine publications, I had short runs. So I'm not going to, dedicate too much time focusing on those because like some of them were like, in and out within a couple years. There were a lot of big players in the industry at the time that basically hoarded a lot of the subscriptions. So, you had other magazine publications that tried to get into the game that just, couldn't compete against the big ones. So we're going to try to focus on some of the more identifiable ones or the more notable ones, so to speak. And also for the purpose of this episode, I'll stick with American magazine publications since it's the region I'm most familiar with, obviously, having grown up here, of course. I think there's going to be one magazine I'm going to talk about, one or two magazines that are kind of UK-based, but they distribute worldwide. The earliest one I found was Playmeter. This was founded in December of 1974. It was published in physical form by Skybird Publishing on a monthly basis. Together with rival publication Replay, which was founded the next year, it chronicled the arcade industry from its infancy through market fluctuations like the video game crashes of 1977 and 83, and the rebirth and maturation of the medium through the 80s, which is crazy because this video game magazine has basically been through it and seen it all. It is the earliest example of video game journalism that I found, establishing such practices as individual video game reviews and the 10-point assessment scale for video game reviews, which we're still seeing to this day with basically anybody that works at a video game publishing, magazine or even online and stuff. So the magazine shut down after publishing the June 2018 issues, which means it's spanned over 45 years. Ralph Lally was the original publisher, and the magazine was passed down to his wife Carol in 1984 after Ralph died in a car accident. Another interesting bit with this magazine, Playmeter, was that their main offices were in New Orleans. In August 2005, in connection with Hurricane Katrina, when the levee broke, 4 blocks. When the levee broke, it was 4 blocks away from Playmeter's 3-story headquarters in Lakeview. All employees were evacuated, thankfully, so no one lost their life or anything like that from the hurricane. But much of the magazine's back catalog included 31 years of archives were lost to that massive flooding. So they stored it all there in this warehouse. So the magazine relocated its headquarters to St. Louis. Truthfully, being one of the oldest publications up until 2018, it was one of the longest running, if not the longest running magazine publication centered around video games. And it's crazy to me that I just don't recall this. I don't recall seeing this. Maybe, if I really thought hard on it, I guess. But I was looking at the gaming magazine pictures, and I'm like, it kind of looks a little bit familiar, but I think there were some that I focused on a lot more than others. So, but obviously, if we talk about video game magazines, we can't not talk about Nintendo Power. Frankly, when Nintendo came out of the gate with the NES, they were the dominant force in the video game industry. It's no qualms about it. And if you want to know anything about the system, you needed to get a subscription to Nintendo Power magazine. Nintendo's really good at cornering the market in terms of their own marketing. They control their narrative. They control their own voice. So even to this day, they're still the kings of their own marketing. Not a lot of people get the first scoop. They're very secretive. And it's like, well, we control how our news is portrayed. This first hit store shelves in August of 1998, and had one of the most iconic covers in magazine history, a clay diorama of Mario jumping on a mushroom while being chased by Wart, who was the major villain in Super Mario Bros. 2, or Doki Doki Panic, if you prefer that name. A lot of their earlier magazine covers were claymation or clay diorama or plastic diorama looking. It was really cool because like it wasn't just art, like drawn art. It was like literal diorama models that they built just for those covers. It was really cool. And then even some, live action, picture model type people that were on the covers as well. One of my favorite ones, obviously, was the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past cover that had a kind of like live actor posing. The magazine's publication was initially done monthly by Nintendo of America, then independently, and in December of 2007, it was contracted to Future US. Its 24-year production run is one of the longest. I would say probably, obviously, doesn't hold a candle to Playmeter, but still a pretty good run. On August 21st, 2012, Nintendo announced that it would not be renewing its license agreement with Future Publishing, and then Nintendo Power would cease publication in December of that year. The final issue, which was volume 285, was released on December 11th of 2012. So that was the end of an era with that. I think they came out with a Nintendo Power podcast for a short amount of time, and I don't think it's running anymore. From the beginning, actually, Nintendo Power focused heavily on providing game strategy, reviews, previews, upcoming games, so on and so forth. At mid-1998, Nintendo Power first allowed outside advertising in the magazine, during this time it was formerly reserved for Nintendo-based products only. And Nintendo had some pretty edgy ads, which, man, I feel like I need to do a video podcast just on those ads alone. It was a wild time. Nintendo trying to be edgy. In its early years, like I said, ads only appeared in the first and last few pages of the magazine, leaving no ads to break up the magazine's editorial content, which was nice. They did a lot of side content, like the infamous Nintendo Power Line. The Power Line was a staffed hotline providing gameplay hints about Nintendo consoles, such as the NES system, obviously at the time, and kept going. It ran from publishing of the first issue in 1988 until 2010, closing once the internet came about. I used this line once. It was like a 900 number, and of course, it was at the time it was like $3.99 a minute or something like that, whatever, something stupidly expensive. I didn't know how to do something in Little Nemo, the Dream Master for the NES, and I felt pretty dumb when the guy explained it to me. And to save embarrassing myself, I will not tell you what I needed help with. I still cringe to this day thinking about it. I'm like, oh my god! Like even when the guy told me, I was like, oh my god, I felt like an idiot. Guy probably laughed. Nintendo Power also produced a series of strategy magazines called Official Guides from Nintendo Power, beginning with the official Nintendo Player's Guide. Nintendo. I said Nintendo. Oops. After Nintendo Power switched from bi-monthly to monthly magazine in May 1990, some issues were positioned as strategy guides for single games, replacing the guides. So, there were some obviously normal publication issues, and then maybe like 1 month you got, one of these player guides, which is pretty cool. Nintendo Power also had its own mascot, which was Nestor. He was created by Howard Phillips, who was the then president of the Nintendo Fun Club and the former editor of Nintendo Power. And he was a supporting character in his own comic strip, Howard and Nestor. The comic strip generally advertised new games, often by dream sequences where Nestor was actually a given video game character. From 1989 to 1993, the Nintendo Power Awards featured a Nestor-shaped trophy and were referred to in the magazine as the Nestors, in reference to the Oscars. So, kind of cool. A year after this, we got Electronic Gaming Monthly, and probably for the purpose of this section, I'm just going to call them EGM for short. Out of all the video game magazines I collected as a kid, Nintendo Power and EGM were obviously my top two. I either was able to get a subscription or basically just buying them right off the shelf at, my local pharmacy or my, when I would go to the grocery store. My mom, back in the day, when she would go grocery shopping, she would just drop me off in front of the magazine section, and I would just sit there and read until she was done, which was really cool. The magazine was founded in 1988 as U.S. National Video Game Team's Electronic Gaming Monthly, which was under Sendai Publications. And there's going to be a little bit more detail if you watch the video documentary that I mentioned earlier, especially with kind of how they came up with the name Sendai Publications, which is pretty interesting. In 1994, EGM spun off a second magazine called EGM2, which focused on expanded cheats and tricks, maps, guides. It eventually became Expert Gamer. I think it was only around for like 4 years. And finally, the defunct Game Now. After 83 issues up to 1996, EGM switched publishers from Sendai to Ziff Davis. From there, it became completely discontinued in January of 2009. In May 2009, actually, EGM founder Steve Harris purchased the magazine and its assets from Ziff Davis. So Ziff Davis said, we're shutting you down. Steve Harris is like, all right, I'm buying all this stuff. The magazine was relaunched next year in April of 2010 by Harris's new company called EGM Media, widening its coverage to the PC and mobile gaming markets, and then unfortunately shut down again 4 years later. It had a pretty prolific impact on the video games industry at the time, had an uncanny ability to break news and rumors before anyone else in the industry. And like I said, if you watch the documentary I mentioned earlier, you'll see how they did it. Some of the most iconic contributions were, one of the biggest ones was the April Fool's jokes, with some of them which were downright mean, man. The most famous one was the Shenlong character in Street Fighter 2. He was like a secret character that you had to do these crazy things to try to unlock. The Belmont characters from Castlevania, playable in TMNT, the arcade game for the NES. This fooled me. The Sega Neptune, available for pre-order. The topless mode in Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. That one fooled me. Lego Halo, which that fooled a lot of people. And probably the most infamous one, easily, was the Legend of Zelda Wind Waker remaster you got when you pre-ordered the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. That fooled me. And I remember at the time, a lot of people, I was going to Funkoland and EB Games at the time, and a lot of people I was talking to there were like, a lot of people are calling in here asking about this like Wind Waker remake, and it's like they had no idea what that was or what they were talking about. So the magazine was obviously well known for its honest reviews and Noble popularizing the 4 reviewer method and ranking games 0 to 10. So it was pretty cool because you had 4 reviewers and they each gave their kind of like arbitrary score. And some of them were pretty widely varied. Like somebody may rate it an 8, somebody else may rate it a 4, especially if it's like kind of like not their type of game, you know? So you're getting different things. Some of their sections that they were very well known for which was letters from the editor, and login, which was letters from readers and replies by the magazine, which is pretty popularized in a lot of different magazines. You had the EGM Roundtable, which was kind of video game discussions, the hot list, background information about critically acclaimed game, the Buzz, which was industry rumors, review recap, which I talked about earlier, and then Game Over, which was commentary articles on video game related topics. And of course, each magazine had a cover story that they talked about. So a lot of different types of content. Around the same time, we got GamePro, and this was published first a year after EGM in 1989. And they, same kind of style: articles, news, previews, reviews, hardware, all this stuff. The magazine was published monthly, most recently from its headquarters in Oakland, California, and went to about 2011, which was clocked it in at 22 years of publication. GamePro's February 2010 issue introduced a redesigned layout and a new editorial direction focused on the people and culture of its gaming instead of just blasting you with, marketing. GamePro had quite a history, actually, starting out as a passion project out of someone's house into a massive publishing deal. And they pretty much got their hands into everything. They made a TV show called GamePro TV, which was hosted by J.D. Roth and Brennan Howard. I don't know who those two people are. The show was nationally syndicated for 1 year and then moved to cable channels USA and Sci-Fi for a second year. In 1993, Patrick Farrell, one of the original founders, this is an interesting thing. One of the original founders sent Deborah Vernon, vice president of marketing, to a meeting between the games industry and the Consumer Electronics Show. Realizing an opportunity, the team at the now entitled Infotainment World launched E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, which is arguably at the time the biggest video game convention, at the time. And obviously it's now defunct pretty much, and it's favored by a lot of smaller different conventions. But the industry-backed E3, and Farrell partnered with the IDSA to produce the event, and obviously one of the biggest trade show launches in history, which was pretty cool that GamePro was there and kickstarted E3, which, you know, nostalgia wishes that it was still around, but we're getting better things now. In February 2006, GamePro launched its online video channel called Games.net, and they had a series of video game related shows. And it kind of geared toward an older, more mature audience. August of that year too, as well. They also announced a new cheats website called Gamer Help, and then also followed by a video game information aggregation site called Games.net, and then a dedicated gaming download site called GameDownloads.com. They, like I said, they ended in 2011. Shortly after that last issue, the magazine changed to GamePro Quarterly, which was a quarterly publication that they were going to try to do using like higher quality paper and stuff. However, they only launched one issue before being scrapped. And then obviously later that year in 2011, their website would, shut down as well. So probably one of the bigger ones, I would say it was GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly were pretty similar in how they focus things. And obviously it was a difference between, what your personal preference was. For me, I was an EGM guy, but if GamePro had a really good cover story article, I bought a GamePro magazine. I mostly bought every that has subscription for EGM mostly, but if GamePro had like a really cool cover story, I was like, hey, I want to buy that magazine. I want to read that. Another one we could talk about, Game Informer. Quite a history. Debuted in August 1991. And the video game retailer at the time, FuncoLand, started publishing an in-house newsletter. And when GameStop acquired FuncoLand in 2000, they wanted to contribute to the success of this newsletter by making it into a magazine. Interestingly enough, in June of 2017, it was the 5th most popular magazine by copies circulated. And suddenly, in 2024, GameStop discontinued Game Informer after 33 years of publication and 368 issues. The associated website was also shut down, with its digital archive completely removed. In March 2025, Game Informer announced that it had been acquired by Gunzilla Games and established as its own business, which was really cool. So we got a revival of that. The relaunch included a revival of the game magazine's website, the restoration of the digital archive, and brought back all of Game Informer's laid-off staff, which was really cool. Game Informer also restarted their publication of that print magazine in June of this year. Game Informer, so going back 1994, Game Informer was published every 2 months, and the magazine began to be released monthly later on. In 2010, I think I mentioned this earlier, in 2010, Game Informer became the 5th largest magazine in the U.S. total. 5 million copies sold, and ahead of popular publications like Time, Sports Illustrated, and Playboy. Ahead of Sports Illustrated. That's the crazy part. By 2011, that number grew, becoming the 3rd largest magazine in the U.S., topping 8 million copies circulated. Layoffs, of course, hit them in 2019, as it does. Half of their staff was suddenly let go by GameStop, which is crazy. These included some staff members that have been working at Game Informer for over 10 years. And some of those guys were even out on vacation during the time of the layoff. God, GameStop. Sometimes, man. Actually, a lot of times. As a result of the layoff, other Game Informer staff also left on their own will at the time, including well-known video editor Ben Hansen. August 2024, GameStop leadership abruptly shuttered the publication, laid off its staff, like I said. So really cool that within a year we had them come back, because Game Informer, a lot of the old Game Informer editors and writers kind of took it back a bit, took the social media stuff back and started to announce like, hey, we're coming back. June 2025, like I said, was the first issue. Glorious return to form for them, as I subscribed. Once I found out that they were coming back, I subscribed to them almost immediately. Once, actually, interestingly enough, I would buy my games at GameStop, but once they shut down Game Informer, I was like, I'm done with you guys. Like, honestly, that Game Informer was the sole reason why I was going to GameStop, honestly, and was part of their pro membership, because it came with a magazine subscription. So I told them to kick rocks. They also tried to do April Fool's jokes with Game Enforcer. They were less subtle about it. They were a little bit more obvious with it. One of their best skits was Darth Clark, who was portrayed as this like edgy teenager and responded to various hate mail Game Informer got. Which, you know, for me, it's like, who are you to like send hate mail to a video game magazine? Like who does that? Like, it's just wild. So yeah, there was Game Informer did the one thing Game Informer did much better, I think, than anyone else, and still to this day, is their magazine covers. Some of the most epic magazine covers, actually designed by the developers themselves. So whatever the cover story was, they got the game developers to actually like, hey, design the cover for us. And some of the coolest looking video game covers. One of my favorite ones to this day is this Mega Man one, where they showcased all the different artistic variations of Mega Man all in one cover. I still have it to this day, and I still look at it, and I'm like, I kind of love that cover so much. Some other notable ones, Tips and Tricks, another one that's published from 1995 to 2007. It was a monthly video game magazine devoted to the subjects of just video game cheat codes, strategy guides, a little bit of lifestyle content. It didn't include any critical reviews of games and wasn't really a primary source of industry news or anything. You basically just got this because you wanted cheat codes. Instead of, like I said, it focused on gameplay instructions, you know, how-tos, and hidden Easter eggs related to games that its readers might not have already, discovered. There were some other system exclusive magazines that came out. Nintendo wasn't the only one that was doing this. The official PlayStation magazine, which ran from 1997 to 2007, as well as PSM, which was running at the same time. And I think at 2007, official PlayStation magazine just like ceased and then merged with PSM. And then around the same time, there was the official Xbox magazine, which ran from 2001 to 2020, actually, which is kind of a long time, especially since like most people were getting out of the magazine game around 2015, 17. We had the official Dreamcast magazine, RIP, which ran from 1999 to 2001, which is about the lifespan of the system itself. During the run against Nintendo Power, Sega had their own, called Sega Visions. This only ran for 5 years, from 1990 to 1995. So I think Sega was doing so many different things that they were like, okay, well, let's try to focus on games and systems, which I don't know if that helped them in the end. But Computer Gaming World, can't forget about the PC guys and girls. Computer Gaming World was one of the longest PC gaming magazines, which went from 1981 all the way to 2006. Some other small notables, like I said, one was Next Generation, which was published alongside Edge magazine from the UK. So Next Generation was the American version, Edge was the UK version, and Game Fan was another one too. I think that was a kind of like a small one, and there's so many more. Like I said, I can't mention all of them. Edge is still around, fortunately, and I can't remember for the life of me. I want to say it was Play Magazine, or maybe it was Edge. But a lot of times when I would go, Barnes & Noble, I would hit up Barnes & Noble, and that's where you get a lot of these like international magazines that people would import over here. And granted, they were more expensive than the American versions, but I as I got older and a little bit more mature in the content I was trying to consume, I liked Edge at the time. I think EGM was pretty much gone at this point, so Edge was still around in the kind of like mid 2000s, so to speak, and it had a lot more like kind of like mature articles. And I want to say, I think it was Play or Edge that did away with review scores and just focused on written reviews and opinions. So if you wanted to find out about a game and to see if it was up your alley, you didn't just look at a review score and say, oh, EGM gave it an 8 out of 10, so it must be good. Or GamePro gave it a 2 out of 10, it must be trash. A lot of times you just want to actually read what makes it a 2 out of 10 game or 8 out of 10 game, because reviews are subjective. So someone could rate a game 2 out of 10 because they don't like the gameplay, but it could be gameplay that's up your alley. So you could totally miss out on games that maybe are trash, but to you could be treasure. So I liked how they did it, and like I said, I can't remember for the life of me if it was Edge or Play Magazine. I swear it was Play. and like I said, it gave justice to the games instead of just slapping a number on them and especially these reviewers that like write whole articles. How many people like would go to the review section and just look at the number and not even read the review? Like, it seems like a waste. So, is anything still around? I mean, obviously, we consume most of our content on the internet, on our screens, on our phones and tablets and whatever. But I don't know about you, but I still love magazines. I still love holding magazines in my hand, especially old school magazines. I currently subscribe to Game Informer, and I also subscribe to Old School Gamer magazine. Old School Gamer magazine, they've been around for a few years, and they're independent. They have their own little publishing corner. I think they were doing Kickstarter stuff at their inception, and I think now they just go on. They have enough of a following that you see them at conventions. They're talking to people, getting out there, and they're practically giving out free issues even too. So they focus entirely on the retro video game space, going all the way back, early 70s stuff. It's got great content, great articles, industry insights in the video games during those times. So they actually pull people from, back then to interview them, and a lot of times they do their due diligence to find these people. That was actually how I discovered the Commodore 64 revival, because they actually interviewed the guys, a lot of the old Commodore 64 execs, and talking about the history and talking about the upcoming Commodore 64 Ultimate that's coming out. So it's a really good place for me to get old school retro news, and a lot of times I bring it up here on the podcast as well. I mean, I will say that I've been a subscriber for a few years, and their content and editing wasn't the greatest in the beginning. I mean, some of their earlier magazines and articles were just riddled with context errors and spelling errors. It just, for me, it's just such a pet peeve of mine when I see that. It's like, proofread your stuff, guys. That stuff sticks out like a sore thumb to me. So lately, over the last, I would say year, it's vastly improved. Context is good, no spelling errors, it's pretty dialed in now. So Game Informer, like I said, is back in full swing, and if you like new game content, that's the place to go, arguably. Retro Gamer is another one that's published primarily in the UK, but it's been going strong for 20 years now, and you can get it here, no problems in America. And obviously they talk about retro games. PC Gamer is still around, focuses on PC games. Nintendo Force is a new, is a kind of like a newer Nintendo themed magazine. I think they're kind of independent, but they work a little bit with Nintendo as well. And obviously you know what they're focusing on. The internet all but killed the magazine space, unfortunately. And when the internet came out, news was coming out faster and faster and faster, and magazines just couldn't keep up. There was really no space left for these physical magazines when it came to news, and I want to say it's affected everywhere, not just in video games, but in any sort of hobby, any sort of niche out there. Back then, that was how you got your news, from magazines. Reviews, interviews, previews as well. That was how you found out about things, how you found out, am I going to like this game? I want to read a review. I want to find out more about this game. And this magazine has an interview with one of the developers. That's so cool. But like I said, the rise of the internet and websites like IGN, Polymega stuff, video game magazines all but died, and only a few remain. Some of the magazines delved into the internet, like EGM had their own, GamePro I mentioned earlier. A lot of different, they tried to kind of play their hands in both, but ultimately in the end, I think more people just opted to go the internet route and just cancel their print subscriptions. So right now, there's actually a collecting space for these magazines. People will collect anything. With them being extremely hard to find, it's not like you could just walk into a store and just find every issue of every magazine. And of course, it's tough to find them in decent condition too. Some of these magazine editions can be up to hundreds of dollars, of course. Most notably, obviously, the first issue of the Nintendo Power magazine. And of course, this depends on condition, what's included in the magazine. Does it have the inserts? Does it have the posters? Does it have all these different things? A part of me actually would love to collect Electronic Gaming Monthly magazines. And I kind of missed out on the Kickstarter that they were doing. It was like an Electronic Gaming Monthly compendium. encyclopedia that they were selling on Kickstarter. They blasted their goal out of the water. So, but I keep forgetting that I think I kind of want to try to find that. But to me, Electronic Gaming Monthly, I love that magazine more than anything else, but I have no idea where or even how to store them. Like I obviously could put them in a box, put them in bins, and just throw them in a corner somewhere. But part of me is like I want it displayed. I have some magazines framed actually. I have the Nintendo Power issue with the Link to the Past in the cover and the Mega Man 2 cover as well. But I mean, I can't frame every issue. However, it's good to know that there's still some in publication out there currently, and I encourage you to check out at least one of them and show your support for print publications. Not a lot of us left. But that about does it for this week's episode. Be sure to follow me on my social medias like X, Threads, Instagram, @RetroX Podcast. This podcast hits multiple different platforms, so be sure to subscribe and enable notifications to ensure you listen to episodes the moment they drop. Full episodes are also now on YouTube at RetroX Podcast, so subscribe to my channel there. And I have some recent video updates there as well. So thanks again to Hair of the Dogcast Network for allowing me to join their ranks, and I'll see you on the next episode.